It doesn't take a genius to figure out that after 4 years of war in Ukraine, the Russian economy is in dire straits. But the Kremlin has maintained that everything is fine in the Russian Federation. But now, even government officials are admitting that the Russian economy might be on its last legs and could be months away from a massive banking crisis. Just why is this happening? And how do we know that life for the average Russian is definitely about to get way worse? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is actually from Bloomberg, and it talks about the fact that the Russian economy, right, particularly Russian banks, say a debt crisis is looming. And what this is a reference to is the fact that Russian banks have privately, according to sources and documents provided to Bloomberg News, have privately said that their corporate and retail clients are failing to make their loan payments. Now, remember, during the first round of sanctions, in order to sustain Russian businesses, these banks extended massive loans to Russian companies, effectively creating demand where consumer demand didn't exist. And the idea for these companies was that with enough cash on hand, they would be able to sustain operations, even if the business itself of the Russian consumer was not able to keep things going. But the problem is that these loans needed to be repaid. And the fact is that the banking system is just one kind of part of the puzzle. However, it's the linchpin for Putin's efforts here. So official figures, right? Some of the people said that official figures are actually masking the true magnitude of the debt problem. They said that borrowers are deferring payments, right? Meaning that they technically are not yet considered to be late payers. Just like if you say, oh, I'm totally good for it, I'm not behind on the rent. It's like your cousin calling and be like, bro, I just need an extra 2 days for my check to clear. You go, okay, he isn't late on paying you, but you guys, we all know if that check isn't really clearing. That's the game that these banks have been playing. They say, well, our borrowers aren't technically in default. We've just deferred their payments for a long time, right? But that doesn't actually make things better. It just means that the bank is stuck holding the bag on these non-performing loans, right? And even more notes are being not repaid as planned. For example, again, your cousin calling and going, well, I don't have $1,000 to prepay your loan, but here's 500, here's 250. Again, the problem is that just like when your cousin owes you money, you in turn have your own rent due. And if your cousin only pays you $250 or $500 or stiffs you at all or pays you weeks late, that can only go on for so long. You can weather it for a month, for maybe a couple of weeks, but eventually your landlord's going to say, hey, man, you owe me the rent check today, the first of the month. And you're going to go, listen, my cousin still hasn't paid me back. And I'm counting on that $250 or $1,000 he's supposed to pay me. And he still hasn't done it. And I am getting more and more cooked as this goes on. And so the banks are estimating that their bad debts run into the tens of billions. One estimate showed a corporate loan portfolio in Russian banks in just the first 2 months of 2025, dropping by $19 billion before restabilizing. This is bad. This means that, again, these loans are just billions of dollars of loans are not performing. And in fact, here's what's crazy is that the mask is actually starting to slip. In the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum last week, the economic minister of Russia said, quote, we are on the verge of slipping into a recession, which is a huge admission from the Kremlin, who has maintained that the economy was completely stable, totally under control. What's fascinating is that the Bank of Russia Governor Elvira Nabiullina, who actually is, as we talked about, has her job and possibly life on the line, as Vladimir Putin has essentially ordered her to no longer continue interest rate hikes for, well, this reason, because the higher the interest rates go, the harder it's going to be for those clients to maintain their payments, right? Imagine if you were to tell your cousin, listen, I can loan you this $1,000, but the interest doubles every single week. your cousin would actually get further and further and further behind. In fact, the more he paid late, the more he deferred, the more he only gave you 250 instead of the full amount, the longer the debt would go. So once he was 6 months behind because of the high interest rate, he would owe you like $6,000, $10,000, right? And so that's the crisis of a high interest rate versus if you had said, hey, you just owe me an extra dollar every week that you don't pay, right? If he gives you 250, 6 weeks in, 6 months in, he only owes you, what's that? $800, right? The interest rates eat the debtors alive. And so Nebelina was ordered by Putin to basically say, do not raise the interest rates in Russia any higher beyond 21%. And so she towed the party line, saying, actually, the economy was experiencing a, quote, necessary cooling. And the finance minister acknowledged, quote, we're going through a cold spell now. But this is a problem because what Russia is boxed into is essentially stagflation, because normally what happens in a relatively healthy economy is that you have these periods of expansion, right? Businesses grow, profits rise, things are going great. But then you have a period of cooling. And what happens that period of cooling is that wages and prices, they don't go down, but they decrease much slower. Again, imagine something like 2008, right? Where you saw the prices of houses actually begin to decline or no longer rise. As a result, what happened in that necessary healthy recession, right? Again, 2008 was a little bit more extreme because of the banking crisis, but a healthy recession normally that doesn't have an accompanying banking crisis, what you're going to see is workers get laid off. You're going to see assets that used to be very, very, very sought after, right, are going to become more affordable to the people who have stable businesses. So what you're going to do is a good recession is going to force all businesses to get lean. They're going to lay off excess workers. They are going to discharge their least productive assets, and the parts of the economy, right? Let's say a crane. You go, okay, it's a recession. I noticed that this construction company that was booming, it's selling all its equipment at a discount. I know that I can use it to build septic tanks or some other sort of more stable business. You go and you buy those assets and your business gets to run them. So that's the idea of a recession, of a necessary cooling, right? That is what you would see here. But the key that makes the necessary cooling productive for an economy in the long term is that you can't have high prices. You can't have spiraling prices. But that's exactly what you have, because you know who's not going through a cold spell is the Russian military-industrial complex. That Russia is effectively printing money and is paying that money to soldiers, to defense contractors, and in turn, it's pushing wages up. So you have a rock and a hard place where wages and prices are extremely high, and no one can actually make their loan payments. And so there's no economic activity, but prices are sky high. This is a massive crisis. Again, imagine losing your job while the price of food is doubling. The price of rent continues to double. And now you can't even work for your previous wage. It is a rapid crisis when it happens. Putin made clear his position. He said, quote, some specialists, this is from Putin, experts point to the risks of stagnation and even recession, he said. This, of course, shouldn't be allowed under any circumstances. Now, any economist will tell you that just because you're the president of a country, just because you're the dictator, doesn't mean that you can dictate market forces. Recessions happen. Again, as we talked about, a healthy economy has occasional recessions to sort of reshuffle where people and capital is allocated. And so Putin, like every dictator, believes it confuses himself with a god. And Putin thinks he can sit there and go, we just won't have a recession. Well, somebody should have told Obama in 2008, guys. He could have just gone out in public and say, I pledge to the American people, telling the economy, you will not go into a recession. And then like that, the 2008 crisis resolved, right? Of course, it doesn't work like that. If you're the president, it doesn't work like that if you're a dictator. So Putin is just mostly trying to reassure the markets that he is in charge, that he won't allow the bad things to happen. But unfortunately, when you run your economy into the dirt, when you piss off everyone else in the global economy, when you go on a 4-year-long war over nothing, right? I mean, look, dude, he's literally bankrupting his economy to take over. Let's take a look here. He's bankrupting his economy to seize what appears to be a tiny chunk of Sumy Oblast. Okay. All right. Was it worth it, lads? And also, his guys are now stuck in Sumy Oblast and actually getting rolled back near Andreevka. Yikes. So this is, again, also worth pointing out. This dude has cooked his economy to spend 6 months fighting the Battle of Toretsk and I guess winning, but goddamn, you wouldn't know it, right? 6 months to take a town that no one's literally ever heard of. So for the Russian public, right, this is the key difference, is that the Ukrainian economy is also under strain, but it has lots of international partners that are willing to work with it to ensure that capital flows, business activity remains as healthy as it can. And also, the Ukrainians are fighting for their survival. So they are willing to endure levels of hardship that the Russians are not. And it's not because the Russians are like intrinsically weak or whatever. It's because this isn't a war for survival. If the Russian armed forces was to pack it up and go home, nothing would change for the Russians. They actually, their lives would get better. A bunch of Russians who would otherwise be dead get to live. A bunch of sanctions get to be lifted. Everybody ends up better off. Whereas if the Ukrainian armed forces packed up and go home, a hostile power would take over their entire country. So motivation plays a part, and a willingness of the public to endure hardship. And boy, the funny thing is that the Russian banks are also posting, though, record profits. You might say that's kind of weird, but pay attention to this number. They say the profits are up 20%, which is funny because that's, as we talked about, if inflation is 25%, which it probably is in the Russian economy, at least the real economy, well, 20% profits is actually a loss, right? It's just like if the price of Coke doubles and your salary goes up 10%, your salary hasn't gone up at all. You've lost money. And so Russian banks, right, more this is a function of the fact that inflation is out of control for these banks. Again, absolutely just insane, right? The military, of course, is continuing to have to raise its prices to pull more labor out of the workforce, but that's driving the wage spiral, escalating inflation. This is, I'm trying to even think of an analogy because this is such a train wreck of a disaster. I almost don't have one because this economy is so complex, and what Putin is trying to do is almost like not sustainably possible. To sustain a war at this scale and maintain a healthy free market economy while not having access to international capital markets is something that, again, most people in the West said this is not possible. It's a testament to sort of the Kremlin's control and honestly their sophistication that they're able to maintain this. But we're going to look at even more evidence that for the average Russian, things are getting really bad. But before we do, I want to talk about two things. The first of which is that while things are tough for the Russian economy, things are actually even tougher for a lot of our friends in Ukraine themselves. Several units, including the 59th, the 22nd, and the Liut Brigade have all reached out saying, listen, guys, we need some help defending against Russia's fiber optic drones, right? Where the Russians may be destroying their economy, but they are able to produce fiber optic drones at scale. So we have partnered with UAO to get these guys the gear that they need to defend these drones. This is straight from the units themselves. This isn't anyone's best guess as to what'll help. They say, listen, we need the ability to find these drone operators where they launch. That means long-range fiber optic drones. We are going to get some collimators for their shotguns because the last line of defense against a fiber optic drone is literally to go trap shooting, to shoot it out of the sky like a skeet shoot. So we're going to get them some collimators. We also are going to improve their mobility so that they spend less time exposed in the most dangerous areas. And finally, we're going to get them a lot of nets because what they can do is put netting across not just their vehicles, but actually across the roadways themselves, kilometers and kilometers of complete netting, which allows the Ukrainians to move logistics to and from the front lines, protected, relatively speaking, from these FPV drones. So if you want to help them out, of course, the link is in the description. The 59th, hook and get anyone up who donates over $250 with one of their patches. I've never seen them drop a patch before. And you can look up the 59th. They literally have their own Wikipedia page. That's how bad they are. So thanks to all you guys that have donated. We're almost 10% of the way there. And these units are literally, you can follow UAO's Twitter or their YouTube channel, and you can literally see in real time as these donations get to the units. It has tremendous value for them. Also, of course, if you haven't picked up your Strike gum, it is superior to an energy drink in every single way. And believe me, guys, there's a reason why the pack is open. It's because I have a 1-week-old at home, okay? I'm running on about 4 hours of sleep here, and I still need to do all this economic analysis. And the only reason it's possible is because I'm literally double hitting coffee. And then when I need to get rid of my coffee breath, I hit a Strike gum, and that 90 milligrams, it hits right away. And you in the afternoon when I'm starting to fade, dude, it carries me. Believe it or not, 3 days this week I managed to get a bike workout in. Yeah, I know. So get yours. Link is in the description, or it's on Amazon. Just go on Amazon, search Strike gum, pick some up. It's on Prime now, so it can be in your house tomorrow. Okay, so here's the thing. What is all this banking, debt crisis, interest rate? If you're the average Russian, you just want to earn some rubles and buy some vodka. Is that so hard, right? Well, the answer is yes, because what's the problem? Well, the problem is, remember, if you're a business, let's say you're a construction business, when do you get paid? You get paid after you build the house. What's the problem? When do you pay your workers? You pay your workers every week until the house is built. So what do you do when you need to pay the workers, but you haven't gotten paid for building your house? The answer is you go to a bank and you say, bank, I need you to loan me a little extra scratch. But the interest rate at 21% means that you got to make a lot of money building that house. And more importantly, if the bank says, hey, we can't loan you anymore, right? And if every week you need to get out a loan with higher and higher interest, it means eventually you just tell your guys, hey, we don't have any money to pay you, right? And so according to the latest statistics, wage earners in Russia, these are construction workers, workers, people that work for a living, you and I, except drunker, the total wages in arrears reached almost $18 million in a single week. Now that's 1.4 billion rubles. Remember, the average wage in Russia is much, much lower. And this is the highest figure since 2021. So literally, since the start of the war, there's never been a bigger shortage of workers getting stiffed on their payments. They say the epicenter is, of course, the construction sector, which makes sense because, well, as we talked about, that's one of the most debt-based industries, right? And you can imagine, we're talking about a house, right? But imagine you get contracted to build a giant warehouse, a rail yard, a mining operation. You're talking about 2 or 3 years. You need massive loans to keep your people paid through that. And now that those loans are 20 to 25%, and you may not even be getting any kind of payment until construction's done, or sometimes they have these things where you hit certain benchmarks and you get paid in sort of like tranches. But even there, it says that these guys are either not hitting the benchmarks in time, possibly because they don't have the materials to continue to work, or because they literally, the company that hired them also doesn't have any money. So you can see this is starting to look more and more like a cascade of at least one sector. As they point out, one think tank said, quote, "This is a consequence of a systemic crisis in Russia's economy, which continues to deepen." And it also makes sense that the construction workers are going to go into arrears first, because construction workers are skew male, and to be a construction worker, you got to be physically fit. You got to be basically capable, right? Again, you don't need to be a CrossFit Navy SEAL here, but you got to have 2 arms, 2 legs, and be able to move objects around. Well, you know who else likes to have men who have 2 arms, 2 legs, and can move objects around is the Russian military. So it's likely those construction workers are the exact demographic that these companies have to compete with the military, which offers, again, the Russian equivalent of offering an American like something like $800,000 a year. So to bring those construction workers on board, you have to compete with that kind of payday. Obviously, you're less likely to die in a Russian construction site, but not by as much as you'd think. And so these construction workers have huge checks due to them, and the construction companies have fewer, and it costs more and more to get the rubles to actually write those checks. In fact, in one instance, this is literally from just 3 weeks ago, hundreds of workers are stranded in a remote mine in Russia because their wages have not been paid for months. 700 construction workers stranded and unpaid in months in a remote town in Russia's far east, Chukotka, right? This is the Zemtech, a mining industry service provider. Ding, ding, ding. Stopped paying wages to its 1,200 employees in March, according to a labor rights activist. And they were, some workers who refused to continue without pay were denied food for 36 hours, right? So then they were forced to work if simply just to get food. Because again, in case you didn't look at this town here, this is pretty remote, all right? About 400 rotational workers were later flown in after law enforcement was contacted about the situation. She said some took out loans to pay for plane tickets to Madigan. Now, this is, again, I want to show you guys, this is another key part. This is a microcosm of the story that we're talking about. These workers, right, get into a crisis. They say, man, I'm not making any money here, and my expenses continue to accrue. And they say, I need to find a way to sustain myself, i.e. get out of this situation. So they go to a bank and they take out loans. But here's the problem. Do you think now that those construction workers don't have any work, do you think they can pay the loans for those plane tickets? No. So what's that mean? That means another Russian bank is going to have to report another defaulting loan in addition to the defaulting loan that Zemtech holds. This is a cascading crisis. And this is a micro version of that being played out, right? So again, the stranded workers published a video appeal earlier this month calling on Putin to help arrange their return home. And this is just what you think. And by the way, guys, the ruble, those numbers, ruble number go up. But guess what, guys? The ruble is actually at its lowest point in 2.5 years. The last time the Russian ruble was this low was actually May of 2023. And so we can see that while Russia has fought to try to use its foreign currency reserves and its central bank to the extent possible to try to keep the currency defensible, to try to keep it at a relatively stable rate against the US dollar, the most stable currency on earth, you can see that basically since about December of this year, their currency has been on an absolute collapse, where Russia has sort of fought with its last breaths to try to give it some stability, but you could see it's just failing repeatedly. And this, again, is a sign of a country in a growing currency crisis. Literally, things have not looked this bad since the first 4 months of the invasion, when a just wave of sanctions crashed into the Russian economy, right? And for years, the Russians worked to sort of stabilize their economy, to establish new payment systems, new ways to connect to international banking. And you can see it hasn't really delivered. So so now we know, why Vladimir Putin is calling Trump on his birthday, saying, Donnie, hey, it's me, Vlad. I just wanted to say happy birthday, buddy. Just hope you're thinking of me here in Russia, where my rubles are worth less than ever. Maybe you could lift some of the sanctions, maybe just a few of them. That would be cool. That would really help us out a lot. Thanks. Beep. Anyway. Thank you guys to our Colonel tier members. Guys like Thomas Anderson, Dan Cochran, Jalen Gao, Officer Murley, Deborah Oppenheimer, Paul JW, Jeff Javies, Mike 54, Shireen Margaret, and the GMAT Club. I don't know if it's the GMAT Club. Maybe just a guy named GMAT Club. And thanks to all the Lieutenant tier members. Hit that subscribe button. Hope you guys enjoyed yesterday's video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.